have two effects processing racks I'm going to show you how to build today. This is what they do. That's just a dry drum loop. And here's some mid-side processing. This fattens the whole thing up. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to use an EQ to drive into a saturation plugin, and then an opposing EQ to reverse some of the gain change that happens just in that frequency band. This is a trick that I saw from another YouTuber called Dan Worrall, who has some like real slick stuff. So I wanted to see if I could recreate it in Ableton. He did it in Reaper. I'll put the link down below to the original video so you can check that out. But anyway, let's jump into just making this thing. Here we go. The first thing we have to do is learn how to just make the core saturation rack, because in the mid-side version we're going to be using two of them. So basically what's happening here, just to go over it before we get the step-by-step in, is I have a bunch of macros mapped to both this EQ and then that one. So as I raise the gain on one band over here, it's going to mathematically do the opposite thing over here. And in that Dan Worrall video that I mentioned, he shows how it actually will null out. So you know that this is being perfectly reversed by this, because it will pass a null test, right? Then where it gets interesting is if you put a saturation plugin. I'm using all stock stuff because I'm going to make this a download available on glitchmagic.com and a free thing for Patreon people. All links to that in the description, of course. But by putting this in the middle, what happens is you're driving signal into this saturation plugin much harder at this frequency band or whatever you're boosting at. And you can basically open up some cool shaping controls, because if you do the opposite, like say I pull highs out of it, I'm saturating less of the high end, right? So it's going to keep this a little bit cleaner, and more of your saturation is going to happen here because this hits the plugin at a higher level, basically. And through just adjusting how hard you're hitting this plugin, you can get some different tonal colors out of things. Or like I'm finding on drums, a good example is sometimes the low end, because there's more energy here, it just hits harder. So what I'll do is just dip out the lows, because I want more of the saturation to happen in the mid-range. I'm sure this kind of trick is used under the hood in many saturation plugins, but I just think it's cool to be able to build this yourself. So anyway, without further ado, let's just duplicate this track, and I'm going to delete the second version, right? And I'm just going to go step by step about how this is built. So the first thing you will need is an EQ8 plugin. So let's go ahead and do that. Actually, let me get rid of this too. Start totally fresh. And then we're just going to well, you could put it into a rack. I meant to hit duplicate, but I'm going to duplicate it as well. So now we have two of them. Let me open up the macro. Okay. So now this is super simple. To get the inversion thing happening, I would just leave these four bands exactly as they are. You're going to hit map, right? And then I'm going to map the frequency of both of these to the same macro, right? And then I'm going to rename this. I'm just going to call it frequency for short. And then you're going to come over here, do the same thing with the gain. But on the second one, come up here and make sure you just invert the range. Because what that's going to do is going to say, okay, whenever this one goes up, this one inverts. This one does the exact opposite, right? So that's how you're going to get that happening. Let me put that back to 64. And then finally, I do the same thing with the Q, because it is nice. And then I'll also rename all this stuff. Call this gain. And then this we will call Q. So that way, if you boost, you can also control the, oh, something didn't work. I didn't map my Q correctly. Now it should work. Good, now it works, yes. So anyway, those are our three fundamental controls I would want. So then I usually would go in and like make all these the same color. So I could see, and maybe rename these to like high, mid frequency, just so we can see that they're all controlling the same band. We'll call it high, mid, gain, and then high, mid, Q, right? So, okay, so now this is working as expected. So now the next thing you need to do is just repeat this process for the low shelves, the high shelves, and then the other mid-range band. I'm not going to make you sit through all that. Okay, and here we are. Now I have everything mapped. I have a high mid, a low mid, a high shelf, and a low shelf. And if I pull up any of these, it should be all working correctly. All right, so now the next thing you're going to need is some kind of plugin to put in the middle that responds to input gain. So I'm going to go with the Saturator. Put that right in the middle here. Oh, whoops. Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. All right, Saturator, put that guy in the middle here. And then finally, the last couple controls I like to map up. I like to take the drive control and map that here. And then I also map the output to the same control and use the same trick we've been using all along, is invert the range. And I'm going to reduce the range to maybe like 15, minus 15 or 16. So when I turn this, what's going to happen... Oh, also let me limit the range so it doesn't go below 0 on the drive knob. So I'm just going to come up here and make this 0. So the drive control, I'll label it as well. Call it drive, right? So I can go from 0, or as I push into the drive, it's going to compensate the output so it doesn't get crazy loud on me. So if I just solo, get rid of this, just solo the new rack I just made. Cool. All right, so I'm getting some nice saturation there. You could tweak this. You could try different saturation modes depending on what you're doing. Let me just keep it back on maybe soft sine. That's always pretty good. But then what you can do is with all these EQ controls, you can actually drive into it harder now. And take things out of it. Like, let me just back this off a little bit. Let me go to my lows and pull some out, actually. You hear how the low end is like fatter now? That's because we're not driving as hard into the saturation plugin. Oop, gotta back up. Anyway, good thing to do. Side note, always back up your stuff. I like backplays. Not sponsored, obviously. Very small YouTube channel, but I digress. So you can do some cool things with shaping how you drive into this with the EQ, and just getting different colors of distortion. I even have a version of this I made that instead of a saturator, it busts out into an analog piece of gear I have in my place here called a silver bullet, which is like awesome. That's worth its own video for sure. But you can use anything. I mean, I like isotope trash. I mean, I know the Fab filter. I think Saturn is a cool one. I don't use it myself, but very good things. So yeah, I mean, and you could easily just stop here, and I will make the earlier version of this. Yeah, this version of it, which is basically the same. The only other thing is I have a wet dry knob over here just for convenience. We could add that now if you want. Just do that. And then you could actually just close all this up and use this rack just like it is. I will make this guy available on glitchmagic.com, of course, for your convenience. But that's just like kind of part one. Then the next thing you could do is you could take it a step further and actually do this not just in stereo, but as a mid-side plugin. So let's get into how you would do that. Okay, so if you want to make this thing mid-side, I would just close this up because we're going to need to copy this at some point. And then what I would do is actually, let's put this inside of a rack here. Yeah. Because we're going to need 2 chains. All right. Just open this guy up. So this is our first chain. We're going to call this one middle, probably. That would make sense. Or mid. I'll say middle, so it's not too confusing. And then we're going to rename the second one. I just duplicated that, Command D. And then this one will be called side. All right. Now we have 2 of these guys. I'll just turn these off for now. And then you're going to need some utility plugins to get the mid side happening. So for the middle channel, right? Let me show. Okay. Mono, that's it. Now this will be just your middle information, right? And then for the side channel, I do 2 of them. All right. So I'm going to flip the phase on the left channel, make this mono, and then flip the phase on this. So now we have just our side information. If we go here, there's our middle. And if I flip the phase on all of this, actually make another duplicate. And if I totally flip this around, we should get a null. Yeah. So we know that this process here, by adding these utility plugins and flipping the phase around, if we take the same thing and flip the phase on all of it in another channel and add them together, it nulls to 0. So we know that it's not changing anything. Always good to kind of confirm that. So anyway, now we have a middle channel and a side channel. Awesome. So I'm going to turn off the side for now. The middle one should work pretty much just as before, right? The only thing I like to go and do is I come in here and I change both the EQs into mid-side mode. And then just make sure that this is a little redundant, but I like to do it anyway just to make it more clear as to what I'm looking at. But yeah, I keep this here. Right, then for the side channel, you can do the same thing. You could say you could take all this and, you know, put it into side mode only if you wanted to be like super sure yourself. The only thing is if you do that, all these mappings are going to be you know, they're mapped to the middle channel still. You'd have to redo all these for the sides. All right, now that I have these remapped, you're going to have 2 different chains now. You're going to have a middle chain with an EQ and a saturator in the middle that can control the input into it. So if we want to boost in here, we can. And we can do that independently of the size. The other thing that's cool is we can control both the drive and the dry wet. So it can get pretty gritty, as you can hear. You can get pretty blown out pretty quickly. And I would recommend trying a couple of different saturation things or something in the middle to add harmonics, because this is really like, this is something that you could definitely run with. This is just kind of meant to be a point of departure. So if you have any questions about stuff or how this is built, something, that step I left out, or like a different type of device that you'd like to see me put together, just leave me a message in the comments. I'd be happy to see if I could come up with another tutorial. And until then, you know what to do. If you're on YouTube, you can go down below and subscribe and see these. I'm doing videos every Monday, full length, and then clips from the Patreon on Thursdays. If you're on the Patreon, there's, again, links to that. You get everything in that case. And, you know, that's where I have a little bit more contact with people. So if you are a patron, thank you very much. This is like huge motivating thing, even if it's like a couple of people right now. So until next time, peace.